Hello, everyone. It's Miss Pavlinsky again. Today we are covering what we will cover on Tuesday, September 20th. I'm sorry, I have some hiccups right now, so hopefully they do not last very long. And we are doing Jackson Part 2, President Jackson Part 2. So on this day, we will have a warm-up, which I'll show you where to find. I'm going to refresh this Canvas page so that it has all of our 920 resources, September 20th resources. As always, you're going to go into modules, scroll down to Unit 2. And first, you'll click on the warm-up. If you are absent this day, you do not have to make up the warm-up or exit ticket, but it is very important that you do know the answers to these questions. These questions are going to come up again. I've been trying to, this is huge hint, I've been trying to be more diligent this unit about exclusively covering test questions, explicitly covering test questions. So as in Unit 1, I just try to make sure that you had the vocabulary, the information, the skill set to get those questions. This unit, you're going to see some of the questions that I'm asking you on slides, on warm-ups, on exit tickets, on your worksheets. You'll see some of those same questions on the exam, but you won't know which questions they are. So it's important that you're always paying attention to these warm-ups, exit tickets, any questions that I ask on Pear Decks, on slides, on your worksheets. If I ever give you comments on feedback for your assignments that say, please recheck this number or add on to this answer, it's important that you read those and process them so that when those questions come up again, you'll know the correct answers for them. So it says that I have a political cartoon about Andrew Jackson on the board. So let's pull up that cartoon here. It's going to be in this one. Sorry. Stupid hiccups. Sorry, I'm gonna pause till I'm done hiccuping. I'm just trying to figure out how to pause. So this is the image that it's going to pull up. We have King Andrew Jackson as opposed to President Andrew Jackson. He's dressed as a king in this photo. He's holding a staff that represents his power to veto laws. That means like deny laws that Congress passed. He's stepping on the US Constitution as if he disrespects it. And we have an accompanying newspaper article. He is not enforcing Worcester versus Georgia, which was passed in 1832, trying to deny the Indian Removal Act. Jackson does not stop forcibly removing Native American people from their territory, their land that they live on. Today, we're going to talk about how he kills the Bank of the United States. He implements that spoils system that you learned about yesterday. And he believes that the author here believes that Jackson is not respecting we the people of the Constitution. He believes that Jackson is being a tyrannical ruler, ruling over the people, thinking that he knows best what is best for the people rather than what the people voted for. So let's go back into that warm up. Let's see what that question asks. What is the article saying about Jackson? Based on what you learned yesterday, do you agree with this message? So the message here is that Jackson is a tyrannical ruler, that he rules over the people rather than with the people and for the people. So yesterday we talked about how the Worcester versus Georgia decision was supposed to stop his Indian Removal Act, but he did not enforce stopping that act. He had already put some of the policies into action, and he did not make any effort to correct those policies. So, based on that information, this is an opinion question. Do you agree with that message? We also have in 1824, 350,000 people voted. In 1828, 1,140,000 people voted. Why? This is because that before 1824 and previously, people had to own land to vote. So only white men over the age of 21 who owned large land could vote. And starting in 1828, that policy was largely outlawed. People no longer had to own land to vote. So that is going to be our warm up for today. We actually ended up going over this yesterday. I moved it around a little bit. So today, instead of me just lecturing to the class, you guys are actually going to look through these slides on your own and fill in this information about Jackson. But this video is intended for those people who may not like to learn in that way. I'm trying to switch it up a little bit so that you don't necessarily have to listen to me talk all day, every day. And so I want to give you a chance to practice looking at information and summarizing it in your own words rather than those fill in the blank notes that we've been looking at so far. So you're going to have a few prompts on your slides. These slides are going to cover these slides with the information about Jackson are going to cover both the first and the second slide of your notes slide. And this is also available in Canvas. So you are going to go through these slides, pick up as much information as you can that answers the questions on the other slide where you're taking in your notes. So this is intended for you to work through at your pace. If you would rather listen to me talk about it, that is going to be what this video is for. Some themes of Jackson's presidency include tariffs and South Carolina nullification. Southern states did not want tariffs. They did not like how tariffs were continually being renewed and hurting their economy. And therefore, South Carolina threatens to secede from the Union. Secede means to leave the Union. So Jackson is punching anyone that gets in his way. That's a theme of his presidency. He is not very willing to compromise. He's not very willing to negotiate. He's not very willing to accommodate people who disagree with his policies. So this is just an overarching summary. And I'm sorry, I guess I should have this in presentation mode. So we will see more ways that more details about this situation in the coming slides. So this is some information that we need to know in order to understand the following information about the nullification crisis. What is the power of judicial review? So when you see a question on here, I want you to pause it and think about your answer. But I'm going to keep going for the sake of time, and since I'm not actually talking to anybody right now. You can pause your video so that you can think about your question. Judicial review is how the Supreme Court determines the constitutionality of laws, how the Supreme Court determines whether or not a law is constitutional. This was established in the Marbury versus Madison case under the Adams administration in 1803. What is the theory of nullification? This is the theory that states can refuse to enforce, which means nullify, federal laws that the states consider to be unconstitutional. This started with the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. when they did not want to follow the Alien and Sedition Acts because they thought that those acts were unconstitutional. So they said that in their state, they did not have to follow it. What are tariffs? We learned about this when we learned about the American system on Friday. Tariffs are taxes that make foreign goods more expensive in order to protect American industry. Why did tariffs cause a sectional divide in the nation? They benefited the North at the expense of the South. We'll go into more details about those as well. So this is a political cartoon. Take some time to pause and think about what you believe that each of these people represents and what the political commentary is that the artist is trying to portray. So here we have the regions. You see the North is this man. The South is this man. The North is larger, meaning that he's wealthier and more powerful. The South is skinnier, meaning he's frail and less powerful, weak. He has all these taxes on his head. That's because the burden of taxes and tariffs, remember that we just talked about on the last slide, tariffs are a rise in the price of foreign products, so that gives American producers the ability to raise their prices as well. So tariffs and taxes are weighing down the South, making the South weak. So here's an example of how that might work. Before tax, a good from the United States is $12 and a good from the foreign nation is $10. So given this, you'd want to buy the good from the foreign nation. After tax, the foreign nation's good is taxed, making it $15 instead of 10. And that allows the American good to raise their price as well. So you'd pay $13 and still have it cheaper than the foreign good because the foreign good has taxes on it. There are two perspectives on the tariffs. The northern perspective is that foreign goods are made more expensive, so people buy more United States goods, and the North industries profit from this increased business. But the southern perspective is that foreign goods are made more expensive, so people buy more goods from the United States, and European countries retaliate by buying less southern cotton. So the economy of the southern states suffers as a result. And to appease the European merchants, the South continued to buy European manufactured goods, even though tariffs made them more expensive than Northern goods. So this is a video that you can watch if you would like. I'm not going to play it within
Congress
this video.
passed a tariff to protect American manufacturers against cheaper foreign.
I don't know if you can hear the volume on here. So these slides are on Canvas because the other students are going to be just flipping through them, picking out information from them. So they'll have the option to watch that video as well. So if you want to go back and watch that video, you are more than welcome to. So the Southerners are already upset about these tariffs. When we get even more tariffs, these tariffs of abominations that take place in 1828 and 1832. This is what they're calling them because they just really hate them. And this stems from a long history of sectional differences concerning tariffs. Those examples that we just threw out there, that northern and southern perspective on the previous slide, things like that have been going on since the beginning of the country. There are just different environmental conditions and different economic systems that create major differences between the North and the South. John C. Calhoun is going to be a leader in the nullification crisis. So remember, nullify means for when a state denies supporting a federal law. John C. Calhoun was actually Jackson's first vice president, but they had a huge falling out, and so Calhoun will not return for Jackson's second term as president. Calhoun is a strong supporter of states' rights, whereas Jackson is here strengthening the power of federal government. Calhoun really wants to focus on those states' rights. So he reintroduces this nullification theory that came up during the Adams administration Alien and Sedition Acts, arguing that states did not have to enforce unconstitutional laws. Therefore, if they determined that the tariffs were unconstitutional, the South would not pay the tariffs. And from this, South Carolina actually threatened to secede or leave the Union. Because of this, Jackson decided to use the military to shut down this message using the force bill. So Jackson's response to South Carolina refusing to enforce federal law and threatening to secede was the force bill. It gave the president the power to use the military, including the Army and Navy, to force states to enforce the federal law. South Carolinians wear palmetto patches to show support for secession. Jackson threatens to personally go to Charleston Square to hang John C. Calhoun. That is how much he hates his former vice president for encouraging this secession. Now, how do you think Jackson is going to respond to that nullification crisis? Same way that Washington responded to the Whiskey Rebellions. Do you remember how that was? With the military. So that's how you get the force bill. This is another representation of the nullification crisis. This guy on the left is Andrew Jackson. This guy on the right is John C. Calhoun. Nullification crisis is the name of this time period when many states were trying to nullify these tax laws in order to avoid paying them. So you see Jackson here wearing shorts that are labeled federal. You see Calhoun wearing shorts that are labeled state. So I'm just gonna shoot off some questions right now for you to be thinking about, and we'll go over the meanings of these questions in just a second. Who does this person represent? He's labeled force bill. Looks very strong. Who do these crowd members represent, and how do you know? Let's see what some of them are saying. No state is above the other states. We can't cherry pick what laws we like. We are a federal republic. Didn't we give the federal government its power? And we have a few that seem like they might have a differing opinion. Void him, Johnny. What happens if the feds target our state? So these are the ones with that other perspective, these two that I just mentioned here. So some of them are referring to something specific. For example, void him. Think about what that might mean. So the setting here, it's being compared to a boxing ring. Jackson's federal shorts represent strong federal power, and the state shorts represent strong state power. This man represents military enforcement in the force bill. And these three here that I'm putting my mouse over are supporters of Jackson and the strong federal government. These two are Calhoun supporters. They're referencing nullification. So void him, Johnny, references nullification. So they're wanting to void the laws in their states, void the federal laws within their states. This one that says, didn't we give the federal government power, is referencing the Constitutional Convention and ratification process. So the states had to agree to give supreme power to the federal government. Remember that supremacy clause that we were talking about on Friday from the Marshall Court, and how the Marshall Court, who is the Supreme Court justices right now, who are going to come up again today, are using the supremacy clause to say that the federal government is more powerful than the state governments. So that's what they mean by, didn't we give the federal government their power? We have another theme of Jackson's presidency coming up here. So kind of moving on from that nullification crisis, it's going to continue to come up throughout the rest of this unit and into next unit. This is another theme about the second bank of the United States. Jackson's mistrust and hatred of the bank system will lead to the collapse of this second bank. So these are some important things to remember as we talk about the second bank. Who championed for a national bank during Washington's presidency? That was Alexander Hamilton. How did Alexander Hamilton justify the constitutionality of the national bank? Remember, you can pause to think about these for just a second. He used the necessary and proper clause, or the elastic clause, and the implied powers of the Constitution. What Supreme Court case established the constitutionality of the national bank? McCulloch versus Maryland in 1819. So that was one of those court cases that we brought up on Friday when we talked about the Marshall Court. So here's some background on this bank war, the bank war between Nick Biddle and Andrew Jackson. Nicholas Biddle became president of the bank at age 37 after only 4 years of being with the bank. He was appointed to the bank by President James Monroe. Remember, he was the president who made the Monroe Doctrine. The bank was under private control with the charter from the federal government, allowing them to work together for mutual benefit. Special benefits were granted to the bank. They could use federal money to make investments without paying interest. This can be risky. Is it legal? That's up in the air. It is legal because it's happening and it hasn't been made illegal yet. So I think more of the question is for you to decide, should it be legal? This guaranteed no bank competitors and created a bonus of $1.5 million. The bank becomes very powerful and could potentially manipulate national affairs. Biddle declared that the Second Bank of the United States was neutral in terms of politics and had no political agenda. After winning the election of 1828, Jackson began to investigate the bank. He notified Biddle that several branches of the bank had been financially supported by John Quincy Adams in the 1828 election, which violated the idea of neutral politics. Biddle did not really investigate the claims, even as more evidence came out, drawing anger from President Jackson. This is another representation of the bank war, Biddle versus Jackson. Jackson believed that the Bank of the United States was too powerful because it was privately owned. He considered it unconstitutional, regardless of Marshall's McCulloch versus Maryland case. It should be controlled more by the government and the people because it was corrupt. Nicholas Biddle, the president of the Bank of the United States, Henry Clay, and Daniel Webster supported the Bank of the US. In an attempt to make Jackson look bad for the 1832 election, Biddle asks Congress to renew the bank's charter 4 years early. Jackson backs down, but vetoes the law after Congress passes the new charter. Well, how does this impact the common man? Some of the common men might work for the Bank of the US. Many of them will bank with that Bank of the US. But at the same time, he feels that this bank is being ruled by the elite and that the common men don't have much of a say in the bank. So again, this video here is going to be available to you when you pull up the slides in Canvas if you would like to watch it. Here we have a political cartoon of Jackson fighting many of the fights of the United States right now. So this is just another representation of this national bank fight. We have here, I am Andrew Jackson. I strongly dislike Biddle. He is from a wealthy family where he got good education and everything he wanted for free. I had to work for everything that I have, and I'm proud to have done the work myself. Here we say, I am Nicholas Biddle, the president of the Second Bank of the United States. Jackson says, I also don't like the National Bank. It is a monopoly that favors wealthy Easterners and limits Western growth. The National Bank must be stopped. Here is, we are Webster and Clay. We are running against Jackson in the election of 1832. We believe that by getting Jackson to veto the bill to renew the bank's charter, it will cause him to lose support. However, their plan backfired, and vetoing the bill only got Jackson more support, which caused him to win the election. While in office, Jackson got rid of the National Bank by removing government deposits from the National Bank and moving them into smaller state banks called pet banks. Then in 1836, he wouldn't sign a new charter to keep the bank open, and it was forced to close. Here we have, I am Van Buren, and I was Jackson's vice president. In 1836, I was elected for president. While I was in office, the Panic of 1837 occurred as a result of Jackson closing the National Bank. The Panic of 1837 was when the state banks began issuing large amounts of banknotes, and the banknotes weren't accepted because people thought that they had little value, which caused economic panic. The Panic of 1837 led to a depression where thousands of businesses closed, banks failed, and the value of land dropped drastically. Many people lost their jobs and land and were unable to pay for food and rent. I believe that government should interfere as little as possible in the nation's economy. So I persuaded Congress to create an independent federal treasury. This made it so that the government money in private banks wasn't being used to back up banknotes. This helped prevent further bank crisis, but didn't solve the problem completely. Here's just a little more information on this. Jackson vetoed the Second Bank of the United States. In 1832, Jackson vetoed a bill that would renew the charter of the Second Bank of the United States, a greater opponent of the bank. Jackson saw the institution as one that favored the wealthy and went against the common man. As a result of this, Jackson went around saying that the bank favors the rich. By vetoing the Second National Bank, Jackson begins his war against the bank. Many saw this as an attempt to foment class warfare and generate support from the common folk. This move increased his popularity and helped secure his vote in the election of 1832. Part of this war against the bank was also when Jackson was establishing these, quote, pet banks. As another attack on the National Bank, Jackson stopped depositing funds into federal banks altogether. Instead, he instituted a depository system where state banks received funds. His enemies called them Jackson's pet banks. However, the effect of this was that Jackson's stance against the bank was solidified when his pet banks allowed wild inflation and speculation to take place. Soon, crisis ensued, and America entered what historians later referred to as the Panic of 1837. In response to the overwhelming inflation and speculation crisis, Jackson issued an executive order forbidding purchased lands except through gold and silver specific. This in turn led to a great demand for banknotes to be redeemed by gold and silver. The banks, however, did not have enough gold and silver to supply the increasing demand. The economy was further depressed. Before this issue could be resolved, Jackson would leave the presidency, saddling his successor, Martin Van Buren, with this economic mess. Here we have a map of some depressions over time. Panic of 1837 here, the Long Depression, the Great Depression, the first and second oil crises, and the financial crisis of 2007 to 2009. Financial crises is caused by various factors, including Jackson's war on the bank and other financial policies. Several state banks closed. They overprinted paper money and could not pay contract loans to other financial institutions. This Panic of 1837 is considered America's first Great Depression. This is another video that you are welcome to watch on Canvas if you would like. So Jackson's legacy involves that new political parties are created to challenge his beliefs. The political voice of the common man gets louder, and it was controversial then and now. It's another video you can watch here.
This card.
It's about the cartoon that we looked at a bit in the beginning of class as your warm up. Oops. Among other things, Jackson's failing health was the main reason that he did not run for re-election in 1836, because remember, there was still no term limit. So he already served 1828 and 1832. He could have served in 1836 as well because there was no term limit yet, but he chose not to. The Whig Party was created in opposition to Andrew Jackson, and the Whigs were opposed to an overly powerful president. How did Andrew Jackson make the presidency bigger and more powerful? This is something you can take just a second to think about, and this is in your exit ticket as well. So just make mental note of these. He uses the presidential veto to promote his own agenda, the Indian removal and ignoring the Worcester versus Georgia ruling that asked him to stop the Indian Removal Act, killing the Second Bank of the United States, which was already ruled constitutional in McCulloch versus Maryland, threatening to kill his own vice president, John C. Calhoun, for going against his beliefs, enacting the force bill to force South Carolina to pay the tariffs. So those are just some of the things that expanded the power of the federal government while Andrew Jackson was in office. He also makes checks and balances questionable. So Congress passes the Indian Removal Act in 1830 and the Force Act in 1832. But Jackson vetoes the charter for the Second National Bank in 1836. So this is an example of how Congress was asking for something to happen and Jackson was able to veto it and stop it from happening. That Indian Removal Act goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules in Worcester versus Georgia in 1832 that the US government cannot remove Indian tribes. So Andrew Jackson says in response to that, John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. Which is not Marshall. That's the Supreme Court justice. It's not Marshall's job to enforce his own decisions. It's Jackson's job to enforce those decisions. That's the power of the executive branch, which is part of the government, part of the president. The president is part of the executive branch, whose job is to enforce the law. So it's not Marshall's job to enforce this, but Jackson refuses to enforce it himself. Something famous that Jackson is known to have said is that after 8 years of presidents as president, I have only 2 regrets: that I have not shot Henry Clay or hanged John C. Calhoun. So based on everything that we learned today, it is Jackson does get impeached for everything that he did while in office. People saw his actions as unconstitutional, but it's not necessarily the case that you think that he should have been impeached. So based on all the information that we've learned, I want you to decide for yourself whether you think that Andrew Jackson should have been impeached. So there's actually a place for that on your worksheet when you're on this page. These are some of your questions. So you can refer back to the slides to make sure that you get the answers to all of these up in your questions. And then here, you'll take a second about the nullification crisis to reflect on whether you think he should be impeached based on his response to the nullification crisis alone. And overall, so based on what we learned about the Trail of Tears in Worcester versus Georgia, the nullification crisis, and the Bank of the US, do you think that President Jackson should have been impeached? Once you have all these, you actually do not need to turn them in, but it's extremely important that you do take the time to process this information and fill it out. And once you are finished, we actually, if you're in class today, we're going to do this in class. If you're watching this because you were absent, I'll give you specific directions. So in your groups, I'm going to assign a quote by Andrew Jackson. And let's do one example together as a class before I get into too much detail about this. So we're all going to be looking at a quote by Andrew Jackson. We're going to think about how we can rephrase this as a modern interpretation. We're going to answer any questions that we are asked about it and answer an overarching question. This is the one we're going to do together as a class. Jackson on corruption in government. How does Jackson feel about government corruption? So let's read this passage, and I'm just going to go ahead and replace any of these big words that I have underlined and bolded here with the vocabulary that I have in the lower left corner. The first time I'll read it as written, and then we'll go back and replace the words. I weep for the liberty of my country when I see at this early day of its successful experiment that corruption has been imputed to many members of the House of Representatives, and the rights of the people have been bartered for promises of office. And let's try it again. I cry for the freedom of my country when I see at this early day of its successful experiment that dishonesty has been given to many members of the House of Representatives, and the rights of the people have been traded away for promises of office. Let's start with these questions, these things to think about. What does mentioning the House of Representatives reveal about Jackson's beliefs about government corruption? This is that he believes, so you can take a minute, as always, pause, think about your own answer. When you're ready, you can play it. This means that he believes that most of the corruption is in Congress, not in his own office of the presidency. Number two, what founding document stated that the government gets its consent from the governed? As always, take a second to pause, think about your answer for that. And this is from the Declaration of Independence. What does consent of the governed mean? That means that the citizens give the government power through electing them and continuing to support them while they're in office. I just got this modern rewrite button up here. This modern rewrite box up here wasn't showing up at first. So when you do this modern rewrite, it's basically asking you to rephrase what's in quotes that was written in 1830 and rephrase it into something that someone in 2022 would understand. So one of the first steps of that is going to be using this vocabulary in the lower left and just go ahead and replace the larger vocabulary words with a synonym of their definition so that it makes more sense. I'm not going to write that out exactly for you. You can take the time to think about that today. In class, we'll write it out together. How does Jackson feel about government corruption? He does not like it. He thinks that it takes away people's freedom. He thinks that it is sad. He thinks that it takes away the rights of the people. So everyone in your groups, you will actually be assigned one of these quotes. See the groups up here, and you'll do your modern rewrite, answer the questions, answer the overarching question. I actually want you to be prepared to share this with the class. And you can actually type right on this document so that I can share this slideshow with the class once you're finished. If you are watching this because you were absent, You do not need to make this up. There will be one other thing for you to do today after we do the group presentations and after we've gotten all of our notes on our slides. And it is this 920 More Jackson exit ticket. Remember what I was saying at the beginning, that these are going to be important for you to make sure that you're reading, pay attention to, and check on any feedback that I might leave for you. How are the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions in 1798 and the South Carolina Ordinance of Nullification in 1832 similar? They both deal with nullification. They both deal with blocking out federal laws and deciding that if a federal law is unconstitutional, that the state will not follow that law. How did President Jackson expand the powers of the federal government? So you can go back to this slide here to see your answer. Use of presidential veto to promote an own agenda. Indian removal and ignoring of the Worcester versus Georgia ruling. Killing of the Second Bank of the United States, threatening to kill John C. Calhoun, and enacting the Force Bill. Any of those are fine. You don't need to list all of them. Just the ones that come to mind for you. More than one. Why did President Jackson dislike the Second Bank of the United States? He thought that it was looking out for the wealthy in the northeastern part of the country and limiting the Southerners and the Westerners. And that is all for today. So as always, all of these sources are going to be in Canvas under Unit 2 under 920, September 20th. If you have any questions about these, as always, please reach out. I'll be happy to help you with anything at all. Thank you all so much. Hope that you have a wonderful day